already, and um, this is the link for anyone who doesn't have it. But we're gonna look for the agenda. Uh, how are we doing on sharing screen, Deepak?
Hold on, I'm just... Desktop one.
Also, Namrod, can you mute, please?
All right, do you guys see my screen?
Yeah, yeah, we see it. Thanks, Deepak. All right, so welcome everyone back to another governance call. We have a few items on the agenda. We're going to talk about CGP 17. We can actually skip on 15 because Amy, who's championing it, can't attend, and she's going to attend a future governance call to go over 15. And 14 and 16. Man, I could have made it in numerical order, but it's just based on who's proposed them first. Let me see. Is there anyone to admit? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So CVP 17. Deepak, if you can click on it. Okay. Okay. So this is the activation of the Celo Community Fund. Deepak, I realize you asked for. Like a time to go over it. I can, you can talk about it. I can give you like 10 minutes for a presentation, then we can do 10-minute Q&A just to keep into consideration everyone else. Okay. All right, it's all yours now.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. So I'll just give a quick introduction about myself and my teammates who want to do this together. And Patrick will explain what we are proposing, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So hi, my name is Deepak, and I've been in the Celo ecosystem since maybe March. I joined here to help out doing the validator audits with security. I have a small boutique security consulting company doing helping security and security operations for the blockchain projects. And one of the things I've been involved in the last few months is helping also like C-Labs build their security team and also help the different security aspects that are relevant to the Celo ecosystem. And once people were like more interested in creating this, activating this Celo community fund, I realized that I want to remain a little more independent from C-Labs. So I want to be more involved in the Celo community. And this is one of the things that I decided that I'll also help provide value in. And I would love to be one of the stewards and also help create like this first Celo community fund and create the systems and frameworks of how we can manage this in a decentralized way over time. I'll give it off to Dee.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So quick word about me, and I'll give the mic to Patrick. So I'm involved with Celo since the stack off. I participated in the competition, but I've been following the Celo project since 2018, since the very start when I found about the Alpha Jores wallet. I have created a wallet within Tezos, the Kukai wallet, and I have experienced firsthand the difficulties that a project could have when they're trying to get support or they need help for funding, for grants. And I'm very much excited to be part of Celo and very happy to have been one of the Genesis validator. And when I saw the CCF Celo Community Fund, which was slowly being built up by Deepak and Patrick, it was really the right time for me, and I want to join and I want to try and make this work, because it's like let's say work in construction in progress. It's like decentralizing the funding mechanism, and I think it can bring some very big success in here within Celo.
All right, thanks, guys. I'm going to take my time to run through where we're at with this proposal and kind of hit some of the changes. So number one, the goal is to get money out the door into the hands of builders and people who are supporting the Celo ecosystem. That is the overall goal, to get as much bang for our buck and get people who are building financial support. That's just off the cuff what I would say the goal is. Another kind of ancillary goal is to figure out this process and make sure that we have a repeatable process so that future teams can come in behind us, future stewards can come in behind us, and we have the pathway kind of already laid out for them. So on section 2, progressive decentralization, the kind of the back and forth that we had was, on the one hand, there's concern about voter apathy. So having to submit and have the entire community of Celo owners vote on every single proposal and in follow-up funding, and how that would lead to voter apathy. On the other hand, there was a concern about giving the stewards complete control over a fairly large amount of money. So the middle ground that we came to was essentially setting a budget, or requesting a budget via governance proposal that we would be responsible for distributing. And that gets us to before I move on to that, I should say that this does not preclude other teams or individuals from doing the exact same thing that we're doing. So we're requesting a specific budget. We're requesting an amount to distribute to the community. But in order to make this decentralized, we expect to see other members of the community will also step in and submit their own governance proposals to distribute funding to various projects. We may even see groups that start to specialize in specific types of funding for, say, on-off ramps, or for meetups, or whatever the focus is, right? So that's our process to decentralization. So we're submitting a proposal for an amount, a budget, as well as the people who will be spending this budget. The implementation, the way that we're going to do this is that Deepak, D, and I will be the 3 signers on a 2 of 3 wallet or smart contract that is essentially owned by the governance contract. And we're going to rework the wording on this slightly. Tim had made a comment on our proposal that actually clarifies this and makes this it describes it a little bit more accurately. But essentially the idea is that we're requesting a spend amount, and the 2 of 3 signature scheme that we have set up will be able to spend that amount. If the community thinks or decides that they need to reclaim that amount for whatever reason, then via Celo governance proposal or hotfix, the community can essentially drop our spend amount to 0. So that's the protection mechanism. And like I said, I'm gonna work with Tim to get the exact language so that we have the description exactly right of how that works. Our role, this is pretty, I think this is well understood at this point. Find good projects, vet the projects, get money, get Celo into the hands of builders. And at the same time, this is quite a bit different than the initial constitution that I had published. And so we've still got that, and we're still intending on pushing that out. I think that it'll make more sense to get a little bit of experience underneath our belt to identify maybe areas that we need to adjust the wording, adjust the processes. If we end up forming a nonprofit organization, we're having discussions around that and whether or not that's the right way to do this to protect our liability, to protect the fund, then that would probably be the appropriate venue to introduce a formal constitution. But the goal here is to get a simplified process out the door so that we can start swinging and trying to get a process, a repeatable process in place, learn from our mistakes. Hopefully there'll be few, but As for the vote, as I said before, we're tying in the stewards as well as the amount. The term in terms of the timeline, we anticipate that we're going to disperse these funds within 6 months. That's our goal. And I'm moving on down to section 5 here. So there's not a specific amount of time that will be, quote, in office or elected. Essentially, it's a specified amount that we're requesting that we'll distribute, and we've set an intention of distributing that within 6 months. So the budget amount down to 5.4 is that we're requesting is approximately 20% of the funds of the Celo Community Fund as it stood a couple of days ago. The management fee that we're asking for is 10%. The way that we came to this number is essentially we worked backwards from the current price of Celo, the quantity of hours that we expect that we'll have to dedicate this, the 3 stewards. So, what our anticipated expenses, maybe about $450 per month for the entire group associated with this, and came out to an hourly rate of $127, which is a little bit less than I think that what the 3 of us typically earn in our day jobs. So it's a little bit less than our opportunity cost, but it's a fair amount. There were some questions around that and how we came to that number. Happy to discuss it, but this is after a lot of conversations, what we felt is worth our time. With that being said, moving down to the last piece, the risks, there are technical risks. There's risks that we may lose the funds unintentionally. There's risks that will be biased in terms of how we distribute the funds. Other projects, if we deny a project, they can always come back and submit a governance proposal to the entire community. If other stewards have come behind us and also gotten budgets, they can also submit their proposal to other steward groups. So these are the feedback mechanisms, but we're right at 10 minutes, so let me stop there.
All right, thank you for the presentation and for being mindful of the time. All right, so we have about 10 minutes for question before moving on to the next topic. So if anyone wants to ask a question, please go ahead.
I did want to answer one of the questions that Tim had asked in the forum, as well as some people had brought it up about the 10% management fee being too much. So I think, again, this is a learning experience. So what we're trying to do here is we're requesting a smaller amount of the entire fund. And we also don't know how many hours it will actually take us. So we're assuming 50 hours. It may be more, it may be less, we don't know. So we want to be a little more flexible and have those learnings. And that's why it is 10%. But I think in the long run, once we figure this process out, we may ask a little more. Again, this 20% of the total fund is what we're requesting. And then we're asking 10% as a management fee. If we request a bigger amount next time, for sure, the management fee will not be 10%. But that is what we reached at.
Well, I have some comments, I guess, instead of questions. Well, maybe some of them are questions. So I guess, first of all, I think generally I'm in favor of this overall structure of it's relatively onerous to pass governance proposals. And I think there are things that the community fund can be used for. The number of things that the community fund can be used for is I think there are enough distributions that we want to make that having to pass a governance proposal for every single one of them is overly onerous on the voters. And even if it wasn't just onerous in terms of the amount of time it takes, it is not it would be hard for every voter to be informed as to whether or not this is a project that merits a piece of the community fund. And so I think this idea of taking out a bit of the community fund to go to a multi-sig where the people that own that multi-sig can kind of focus on diving deeper into the details of how that carved out amount would be spent, I think is a good framework overall. And it's funny because I was actually going to propose something similar when I go for CGP 14. I forget the number, but I'll talk later. In terms of, so I like the framework. In terms of this specific proposal, I think something that would make me more comfortable with thinking about or like making a distribution and thinking about an amount for that distribution would be a more targeted like thesis of what the money would be used for. So I forget if it was Deepak or Patrick or whoever said that like we might see many of these. I think it would be great to see many of these, but I think for each of them, I think it would be important to know like what is the specific thing that this is going to focus on. And I worry that without that, it's like hard to know how, like it's hard to, as a voter for this, be able to reason about how effectively this these funds might be used to kind of further the Celo ecosystem. A very, very small technical note, I think it's disingenuous is the wrong word because the motivations were pure, but I don't think the governance contract being an owner here really gives the governance any recourse to recover funds, right? Let's imagine that, you know, some owners are like not trustworthy or not using the funds in a way that is consistent with the way that they said they would. There's nothing, once those funds leave the governance contract, with just a multi-sig, there's no way to stop that. You could imagine potentially setting this up with a release gold contract that releases some of the Celo over time and having the governance contract be the owner of that and basically saying like the governance proposal approves, you know, 100,000 Celo a month for 6 months. And at any time, if it seems like it's not being used correctly, the governance can claw back what hasn't been released so far. And potentially it could claw back what has been released if the owners aren't purely malicious. But it would allow for a bit more downside protection at the expense of flexibility, right? Because the owners would not have access to funds that have not been released. So I think that's just one tool in the toolbox that might be valuable to think about.
Great, so let me thank you for those points, Asa. Going kind of working back from where you ended. So I was, Tim had suggested that it was possible to basically structure this in such a way that we have permission to spend from the governance contract, but that permission could be revoked. If that's not the case, then you know, I think that we should take that offline, the technical implementation, but the intention is clear on that. To your point about the specific thesis, look, I would love to put a specific thesis, but we're the first ones. Like, I don't know what kind of proposals we're going to get. So, you know, we're going to, I think we should just see what comes in and we should filter them and then, you know, allow for specific focus to kind of emerge from that. I'll tell you that as specific as, you know, specifically, we want to support the Celo ecosystem and the people who are building on that. So whatever that looks like in this phase is what you know, we would be pushing funds out the door to. You know, beyond setting kind of a broad intention, I would push back on that and say that it's probably a little bit too early to specialize in terms of how the funding gets spent early, because we don't know what's going to come in as a request.
I would also like to add something else, like on the previous call that we had last week, one of the feedback that we had received was in another ecosystem that there was a community fund which was available, but basically there was no requests which were being made. So there was no people using it. So I think that like one of the tasks of the stewards would be really to market the community fund and then bring project owners and builders so that we can bootstrap them, but it's hard to say initially what it could be.
Yeah, I agree that you may have to do some like outbound work for this, and so that's kind of where I would like to and I'm open to being wrong about this, but like that's kind of where I think like a focus area would help. Like, so if you were to say like, you know, I think probably to start with a smaller amount of funds and say we're gonna try, you know, 100,000 Celo focused on like supporting kind of projects focused on like the merchant onboarding experience, for example, and then to like go out because you're likely to have to do some kind of outbound work that will make the like having a target for that might make that a more tractable task for y'all.
I'm gonna push back on that again, and here's why I'm gonna push back is because you know, one, we did get the feedback from the Cosmos ecosystem that people are not using the funding and they're not requesting funding from that, and there is reasons for that, which I think that we can probably avoid in terms of how we structure this. Two is that, you know, Celo Camp, if we look at how many applications Celo Camp got, there's a lot of applications. If we look at the Celo Foundation, it sounds like the Celo Foundation is getting a lot of applications. There's a lot of people who are looking to build and who are looking for support. So I don't think that we're going to have a problem of people not coming in and not wanting to build. But you know, early on, we attempted to put quite a bit of structure and parameters around what we were doing, and really the feedback that we got generally from the community was simplify it. Let's simplify it so that we can get money out the door, right? And so that's where we are. We're at a place where we're simplifying. Where essentially what we're asking is the community to trust our judgment on managing these assets and distributing them in a way that we think will most benefit the community, and that we're incentivized to do that. So that's the ask in this proposal.
And I think if just to close that point, I think if it helps, we will put like a general like guidelines for thesis of what we are thinking so that people know, at least we have a general direction. I think it makes sense to add something like that.
Just to quickly note as well, maybe two quick comments. I think one is I very much agree with the focus I think should be to get money out the door as quickly as possible. And I think that in that regard, I very appreciate, I think, the focus, Patrick, to simplify. I do think that as part of that, I think, at least to me, with my personal take, is that I think 650,000 to Celo is a big chunk of money that I think, while we clearly as the community would have to trust you, I wonder if we can kind of start with like we don't have to wait 6 months for governance to kind of keep adding to the budget. And I think a 2 out of 3 multi-sig that contains more than $1 million does worry me. And so I feel that a smaller amount with possibly a higher management fee, I think is, at least to me, like acceptable. Like to me would be something that I would love to see considered. And then the second point was that I'm not sure, I mean, this is probably the right time to discuss this, but I'm not sure whether the framework of, well, and there can be many teams of stewards applying for the community fund. It seems to me like we're basically making governance be responsible for then selecting between stewards, which is just adds to the voter apathy problem. And to me, it makes more sense to have a like one entity, which is I thought the community fund, to kind of like have specific stewards that might be focused on things, but not have different teams of stewards to focus on different things.
I need to interject here and say that we need to move on. I posted the link for the forum post for the discussion. My proposal is that continue the discussion on the forum post to capture everyone's point, all the questions and stuff. And we can propose in a future governance call to go over all the other questions that have been asked and, to answer them, just to continue the governance process. Deepak, if you'd be so kind to go back one page.
Hey, Yaz, is there any chance I can just squeeze in one tiny little short thing that's overall?
Right. Yeah, you have a minute, Victor. Go for it.
Okay, I'll do 30 seconds. I was just gonna say, like, looking around at other protocols, like this is an extremely competitive time to be a layer 1 protocol and to get people to build on you. I think that overall protocols should be loose with their purse strings and just try to, capture as much developer attention and build as much tooling and resources as quickly as possible, especially at this time. And so anything that we can do to get this moving, as quickly as possible to lower this bar as much as possible is going to be worthwhile, I think.
I'm also going to capture everyone's point that they said on the video, and I'm going to post it on the forum post after, and I'm going to post a link to the call as well here. We're going to skip on CVP 15 because Amy can't make it. So we're going to go to CVP 14. I think that's the one by ASA, right? CUSD reward.
Yeah, and I would almost, so if you've been following along, probably the forum post related to this has the latest, as opposed to this this CGP. And I would propose that I probably want to rename this not to CUSD rewards, but like it's really the proposal is about using the community fund for kind of a consumer growth initiative. So let me see who else is on the call here. If anybody else on
I think Emily is on the call and Claire. I'm sorry, I thought I forgot who the author champion.
No. I am the author, and I'm happy.
Yeah.
Like I am more than happy to champion. Yeah. So basically, if you've been following along the forum post, the idea here is to, to kind of address a similar tension as the one that Patrick, Deepak, and Dee brought up. We have kind of a lot of funds in the community fund that aren't being used for anything, and one place that we thought might be a good use for them is towards a consumer growth initiative. So we have kind of, the Valora wallet being released kind of generally pretty soon. And with that, I think an increased focus on kind of gaining adoption for Celo as a payments platform. And one way you typically do that is with growth initiatives. It's very early days, and so we don't have a lot of data on exactly kind of what the best way to use that money for kind of end user growth would be. And so what we're proposing is basically a iterate and learn framework where we would basically ask for a pot of Celo from the community fund, probably in a multi-sig, similar to the previous proposal. And then to basically, the iteration looks like we form a hypothesis. And I think the first hypothesis is going to be, well, I'll skip the first hypothesis. We form a hypothesis about like, what is an action that can be incentivized? And what are the effects on, what are the metrics that we expect to impact with that incentive, and how do we expect them to be impacted? We, based only on on-chain data so that the distributions are verifiable, basically identify a random kind of experimental group, a small subset of users on which to provide these incentives. We message that incentives are coming to at least via Valora and possibly via any other kind of wallets. And then we, after kind of the time period over which the incentives are being distributed, the incentives are distributed, and we see, is there a meaningful difference in the metrics that we expected to influence between the experimental group and the control group. And then kind of over time, we test out different hypotheses, and we start to learn kind of what are the leading indicators of kind of adoption of Celo as a payments platform. And as we gain that confidence and that learning of kind of what are the actual things that can be incentivized to drive the metrics that we really care about from a like growth perspective, we can kind of make these experimental groups larger and shift from learning to focusing on piling more on growth. And we have Crystal kind of working with us on a part-time basis at C Labs, and I think JB was here earlier. But we have a couple people who have a lot of experience in doing these sorts of growth initiatives and kind of looking at this sort of data and making hypotheses and inferences from it. And so yeah, I think the first thing we would suggest doing is just trying to incentivize holding a Celo dollar balance, and I'm happy to get into why that is a good first step. But again, that is just kind of the kind of base case of what is really an iterative framework. And the way we would do this practically is we would ask for an amount of Celo up front that would kind of give us a, say, 1 to 2 month, probably like a 2-ish month runway. We would run these experiments. All of the criteria would be on chain, so anybody can verify that the distributions were made like we would advertise kind of exactly what the criteria is. And so anybody would be able to verify that the distributions were used in the way that we said we were. And we would also track the metrics that we're looking to influence would also be on chain. So we would publish like, here's what we tried, here's what we saw, and everybody would be able to verify that the funds were used for exactly that purpose and that it had the effect that we said it has. And then after a few iterations of that, we would come back to governance and say, you saw our progress, and kind of it's up to governance and the community to decide, was this an effective use of the funds, and do we think we should continue to fund this? Yeah, and open to kind of, would love to hear questions, feedback, and happy to dive deeper into any of these pieces.
Okay, I'm gonna allocate 7 minutes per question before we move on.
One question about asking for the funding. Would this be like released, like let's say you set like 2 months runway? Will you ask the whole amount at once and you automatically release this, right? That way people vote only once and not every 2 months.
Yeah, depending on the amount, we may or may not want to structure this as like a releasing, like, so we could do it a couple ways, right? We could ask for the bulk amount and just say, this is gonna get it. We think this will get us 2 months. Like, can we have it all now? Or we could say, we think this will get us 2 months, and can we set this up so that this is released to us every 2 weeks? So that, if there is malfeasance, it can be clawed back. I think it's a trade-off between safety and like convenience and speed. And I think probably the actual amount that would last us 2 months would determine like what degree of safeguards we would propose come with this. I suspect in the early days that the amounts will be pretty small, because we're talking about like very targeted, or not targeted, small experiments, right, about learning, and not really about trying to drive these metrics on a like very large scale. But unfortunately, I don't have like initial numbers at this stage of the proposal. Obviously, that is very much a prerequisite to actually like doing this thing, but wanted to kind of get feedback, like what and kind of questions well in advance of like actually having those numbers. I think they'll be small.
Yeah, I meant more like, I think if you're asking money to give this over 12 months, I would be okay if we just said over 12 months, we may require so much, and then every 2 months we release so much. That way, after 2 months, we don't come back again and like say, hey, we want more, right? It'll be nice. Again, going back to that voter apathy thing and overwhelming the voters at this point, I think I'll be more comfortable. Like, let's say 12 months, we want so much, and then we come back in 2 months and say, this is what we learned, and we'll update like how we use it later on.
Got it. So you're saying that you would prefer that we actually ask for more and put safeguards on it, commensurate with that amount, rather than asking for a very small amount up front.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Any further questions?
I may have missed it, Ace, but how much are you looking to ask for?
I don't have that number. I would, I don't have that number. I think we were initially thinking like, I don't know, JB, I don't know if you talked with Crystal about, like, because it really depends on like the size of the experimental groups that we're starting out with. And I'm not a data scientist and I don't have a good intuition for like what is a large enough sample size to be statistically significant. But really we want to hit that like the learnings are, we have a large enough experimental group so that the learnings are valid, but small enough that we're not spending a lot of money early on before we actually like understand the leading indicators that we're trying to drive. If you want me to pull a number out of my gut, I can do that, but I think they'll be relatively small to start, in the like tens of thousands of Celo.
Yeah, I guess my one concern about requesting too much too soon is that, not that it's difficult in any way to like give it back, but just from a security point of view of having too many funds associated with a single address. And just needing to be like careful about custody. So long as it sounds like you're way below that limit though at this stage.
Yeah, I would prefer to focus less on the amounts right now, just because obviously they're very important, but I just don't have like the data to make a meaningful discussion about like how much, like obviously we don't want to keep coming back every week to governance because that's a pain in the butt for everybody. And at the same time, obviously we don't want to ask for like 1 million Celo. And so I guess I would prefer feedback on like, is this a framework that people feel is an appropriate use for the community fund? Like, is this something that people would be excited about spending the community fund on? And if not, like why, and what, you know, potentially what could we do to kind of meet those needs better?
I think it's a good idea. I think we as a community should fund it.
I would say it's a really good use of funds. Like the key thing that we need at this stage is that, okay, we have mainnet which is working, and so we need to grow the user base. So it's really needed, and it's a really good idea. And I like the A/B testing approach, and to try and see what behavior to incentivize, and how to do. So I like the fact that. It's really experimental, and it will slowly be becoming with the data support. I think it will bring a real difference to the Celo growth. At least this is my hope and my belief into that proposal.
Are you asking for enough money?
I'm sorry?
Are you asking for enough money?
I haven't asked for an amount of money yet, so I don't know if I'm asking for enough money.
Okay. So I guess like what amount are you thinking?
Well, that's the problem. I don't know how big the experimental groups need to be in order to be statistically significant at this stage. My intuition is that we're talking like 10-ish thousand Celo per experiment early on, which would be like 20,000 Celo a month, but that's really an intuition. And obviously before we can advance this proposal, like I need to have specifics on that. But just, yeah, not there yet, more, but will be soon, I hope. I think by the next governance call, I can put specific numbers out there.
Okay, I think we should ask for more. Like, so there's a lot of things that are getting people's attention right now, and a lot of folks like don't even bother if the numbers are too small. Like I can earn a couple $100 using Coinbase Earn or whatever the fuck, and I'm just like not doing it because like it's a whole process. I gotta figure it out and like go through the steps and do it. So just ask for too much, and it's okay because we can always like scale it back if anything. And it's better to get that traction, get that ball rolling.
Yeah, I don't think, just to be clear, I don't think we're looking to compete with like yield farming, for example. Like
for sure. But you want it to be like, you know, worth the effort that people go and like do all the things.
It needs to be compelling, right? I mean, and we'll see if it's not, right? Because we'll see that the metrics didn't move in the way that we like hypothesized they would move. And we can obviously, the next experiment could be to go bigger. But it sounds like you're suggesting we start off bigger.
Yeah, just start off at a healthy pace. Like you can always pare it back. Like the worst scenario for any protocol is to end up having a huge charge rate and nothing to spend it on.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Cool. Sweet. Thanks. This is all helpful. I think we're at about the time that we had budgeted for this. I'm going to follow up on the forum post with more specifics as they come in. And I know last time there were concerns that I think are still probably stand. I don't know why they would go away, about people trying to like game this system. And so I'm like happy to follow up there as well. I think it's kind of going to be a manual and like gut feel detection, and probably like we will lose a little bit to people sibling, but because because this isn't in a smart contract that's making these distributions automatically, we can detect if like all of a sudden things change far more than is a reasonable hypothesis for things to have changed.
Okay, we really needed to move on to the next one. Thank you, Asa, for the presentation. I highly recommend everyone to follow up on the forum post for more discussion. Next up, CVP 16. Alec is on the call, I believe.
Yep.
All right, you want to kick it off?
Sure, yeah. So the motivation behind this proposal is really just to make it easier for us to pass governance proposals. And there's some low-hanging fruit we can take advantage of in terms of just tweaking some network parameters, specifically the baseline quorum factor, which is like the baseline amount of voter participation that you need to pass a proposal is a function of the historical average voter participation level. And specifically right now, it's like the entire historical average gives the baseline quorum factor is 1. So if we have that to 0.5, we'll have an immediate drop off in the baseline we need to pass proposals, which will make it easier to pass like the next contract upgrade, for example. And then the second thing is just increasing the referendum stage duration to 7 days instead of 5, which just gives voters more time to vote on proposals.
Cool. So I'll give 7 minutes for Q&A. We have one last thing in the last 5 minutes that I believe Claire wants to go over. So 7 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll move on.
Could these two kind of transactions be decoupled? They feel like they're somewhat separate problems to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could easily do that. In terms of, you mean separating them into 2 CGPs or 2 different like governance proposals? Or I guess the same thing. So yeah, we could do that. That probably makes a lot of sense. I think they were coupled based on like the motivation, but yeah, that I think makes sense.
The problem, as I see it, is that the like number of votes that you need to pass a proposal just keeps growing and growing and growing, and it like becomes extremely onerous to like. We have, I think, a smaller subset of very engaged people that are always going to participate in governance, and we keep having to reach out to the people that like are maybe more reluctant to do that in order to get like the participation levels up enough. And so I'm personally much more supportive of 1 and like not as clear on 2.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense.
So if you set this to half, then that means, so for the next proposal, it's going to be 50%. But then let's say if it passes by the minimum bar, after that proposal, the baseline will drop by around 10%. So after that, it's going to be 45%. And if you do 1 more, it's actually going to be around 40% after basically 2 proposals if they pass with minimum bar. So are you worried about that kind of drop off? Is that still okay? You know, how low are you okay going down to, right? Because basically with this, if you set it to half, if we are passing proposals by minimum bar, which I think is what's going to happen, because basically we'll pass the threshold, you're no longer going to reach out to those whales who don't like to, you know, take out their wallets. So we'll continue to pass proposals probably with the minimum threshold. So the baseline will decrease at a pretty rapid pace by 10% each time. So you will actually get close to the, I feel like we will get close to minimum baseline pretty quickly, actually, if we pass a bunch of proposals. So that was my point that I put in the forum post, that if we set it to 80%, then that drop off is much slower. So, you know, if we are just barely passing, it's not decreasing significantly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it really depends on whether we will be passing by the minimum, and maybe Claire can speak more to that, because I think the plan was to still coordinate with a lot of whales. And
yeah, so I can speak to the 2 points made so far. So the reason they're coupled is a lot of the bigger voters, they have processes in place to go and do the votes, and it's typically 1 day a week. And it's like, for some of them, it's Wednesday or Thursday, which means right now they have to go out of their standard processes to vote, which makes it already hard enough. So I think if we couple 1 and 2, we'll likely be staying above that minimum, because when the big backers vote, they typically vote in big chunks. And so way past like their rounding is pretty large. So I would be in favor of actually coupling the 2 together for that reason, which is, 1, making it easier just to reach a threshold such that we don't have to always depend on every big backer. But 2, let's also make it easy for the backers to vote, because right now it's not easy for them.
I think one more thing that I didn't see called out explicitly is that extending the voting duration, of course, means that any proposal now will take longer to pass through. And I don't know, I think so far most of the proposals haven't been really urgent by any means, but I think, of course, the longer the period, the harder the more turnaround it will require.
It's strange you said for urgencies that we would do hot fixes. So this is also a question of how we define urgent.
yeah, these are great points. Maybe we can continue to discuss this on the forum. I mean, I think it would be great to get the baseline quorum factor in soon, it sounds like, so we can see that immediate like relief on the baseline. But there's also another question around like when we would do this, and we could either push this through ahead of the like upcoming contracts release, or we could batch them together. I was wondering if maybe we could talk about that briefly, Claire, if you have any input on that.
Yeah, back to rallying the voters, and now that the baseline keeps going up, I personally would be more comfortable just bucketing this in with the next covenants proposal. I'm assuming that's contracts release too, but if there's something else, we could do it at the same time. The idea is, let's just make it easy for people to vote.
I mean, would it be okay if you submitted those proposals together, but as separate proposals? I feel like, just as a practice, coupling all these unrelated things together is just not a great practice. And from voting perspective, they can vote on all, you know, let's say if you, even with these 2 things, if you submit them as 2 separate proposals, they can still go through at the same time, right, through voting. So people can actually vote on both of them. I'm guessing for when you're hurting those people to vote, it doesn't matter if they vote on 1 proposal or if they vote on 2, if they're doing it at the same time, right? It won't be 2 separate days that they have to vote on, but at least it will give us actual separate votes on each of these proposals. Otherwise, we just get into this habit of bundling things that are not actually related to each other. Like, let's say core contract upgrade and this getting bundled together, it seems like too much bundling.
Yeah, 100%. I meant in terms of timings, not in terms of proposals. And actually, I was thinking through the conversations all through now today. Like, I'm Swiss, and the way we have to vote like every month, and the way they do it is they have like a little, like, they batch the proposals but then you have to vote individually on each proposal. I really like that model, because then you're like, okay, I'm going to sit down and read through the little booklet or all the docs, and then there's one day where I have to go and vote on each of them. So I'm totally up for trying a model like that. I think one thing that we might want to, how do we present this so that it's easy for voters to get a summary of what are the different proposals, what are the arguments for, what are the arguments again. So we might want to think about some docs, some comms materials as some of these proposals get bigger and more impactful.
Cool. I think we're at time for this session. I would suggest we continue the discussion on the forum post. I posted it on the chat if everyone saw it. I think there's a good call out about separating the two CVPs because I think that's what we do in the CIP process as well. So that's a good call out on that. The last item, I think, if you scroll down, Claire, you wanted 5 minutes to discuss updates, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick heads up because I saw that in Discord there was some discussions about additional stable assets. I want to give a heads up that I started thinking about this, and I've been spending some time gathering requirements around what would be some of those additional stable assets and what would they look like. So please have a look at economics for assets. To have the big effect. So like another Celo dollar, like a Celo euro or Celo Filipino peso. And just want to give a heads up that we will be probably submitting a CGP and or CIP in terms of what that might look like. So keep your eyes out for that. We'd love to get your input and feedback on that. And then as well, if you are hearing of any use cases or needs for stable assets, please reach out to me. I'm interested in hearing more.
Cool. Thanks for that update. Is there any closing comments? Anyone have any final thing they want to share? We got 3 minutes. Otherwise, we can just call it early. Okay, I'll take your silence to mean you all want to bounce early. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for participating in another governance call. Stay tuned for the future governance call being scheduled. Thanks for everyone who submitted a proposal and discussed it today. And yeah, I'll catch you again later.
Well, thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks everyone. Bye.
Hi, everybody.
That's it.
Thank you.